My name is Victoria Martin, and I am 30 years old. We can only afford one party this year. Victoria and your brother needs the networking. My father delivered those words through the phone, with a clipped sigh, sounding annoyed that I even had the nerve to ask. That was his justification for why I was deliberately excluded from a lavish $15,000 birthday celebration. A birthday, I should add, that we share. Tyler and I are twins. The realization that I was cut out of my own milestone birthday stung, but it was not the detail that made the blood freeze in my veins. The betrayal that cemented what I had to do next came down to a simple math problem. Exactly 3 weeks earlier, my mother had called me in tears. She claimed the roof of their home had suffered severe water damage and was caving in. She needed an emergency $15,000 loan. I did not hesitate. I wired the money from my savings account before my lunch break. I believed I was keeping a roof over my parents' heads. Instead, I funded an exclusive rooftop venue in Scottsdale. I found out through an Instagram video my mother posted. I sat at my desk watching her pan the camera across a champagne tower, neon signs, and an ice sculpture shaped like my brother's initials. I paid for a party I was not allowed to attend. My family treated my financial stability as a limitless resource, while treating my presence as an embarrassment. They thought I would swallow the insult, keep my head down, and continue being the reliable, invisible daughter. What none of them factored into their reckless math was my actual profession. They forgot that I track discrepancies for a living. I am an auditor for corporate mergers and acquisitions. I spot lies hidden in spreadsheets. So when my brother called my phone at 3:14 in the morning, screaming until his voice gave out, demanding to know how I single-handedly evaporated his $3 million investor term sheet, he finally learned the cost of keeping me off his guest list. I sat in my dark kitchen, listening to the golden child realize his entire future had just been cleanly and legally dismantled. Before I explain exactly what I said to him, please take a moment to like and subscribe to Eldenly Stories. If you have ever been the scapegoat in your family, tell me your age and where you are listening from in the comments. I read every single one. Now let me take you back to the Friday morning in Phoenix, when that Instagram notification changed the trajectory of all our lives. It was Friday morning, just 24 hours before our 30th birthday. I sat at my standing desk in my downtown Phoenix office. The Arizona sun beat against the floor-to-ceiling glass, casting sharp angles of light across my dual monitors. My screens were filled with balance sheets, corporate risk assessment models, and quarterly profit reports. Numbers make sense to me. They balance. They tell the unvarnished truth. My family, however, operates on a very different accounting system, one where the math is entirely driven by favoritism. Tyler and I shared a womb, but that is where the equality ended. In the Martin household, my brother is the sun, and I am merely a rock caught in his gravitational pull. Growing up, sharing a birthday with Tyler meant sharing the oxygen in the room until there was none left for me. If I wanted a quiet dinner at a local Italian restaurant, Tyler demanded a loud arcade party with 30 of his friends. My parents always compromised by giving Tyler exactly what he requested, promising to make it up to me later. Later never arrived. I spent my childhood eating leftover cake, smiling for the camera, and learning how to take up as little space as possible. By the time we reached our 20s, I had stopped asking for a seat at the table. I focused on my education, my career, and my independence. I built a fortress of spreadsheets, risk assessments, and undeniable facts. Whenever Tyler failed, my parents called it a temporary setback on the road to genius. Whenever I succeeded, they called it expected. My phone vibrated against the wood grain of my desk. An Instagram notification flashed across the locked screen. My mother Patricia had just posted a live video. I unlocked the device and tapped the alert. The screen illuminated with a sprawling panoramic sweep of a luxury rooftop venue in downtown Scottsdale. The location is notorious in Arizona for catering to new money and tech influencers who care more about optics than actual substance. The video showcased sweeping views of the desert valley, flanked by imported palm trees and velvet ropes. My mother panned the camera with the shaky excitement of someone touching a world they do not truly belong in. She zoomed in on custom menus printed on heavy cardstock. She filmed the DJ booth where technicians were already setting up expensive sound equipment. Then the camera spun to the center of the terrace. A custom neon sign glowed with a toxic blue hue against a wall of white roses. The glowing cursive letters spelled out Tyler's Dirty 30. Beneath the sign stood a towering pyramid of crystal champagne glasses. My mother's voice narrated the video, thick with pride and breathless excitement. She gushed over the floral arrangements and the extensive guest list they were expecting. She filmed a customized ice sculpture resting on a lighted pedestal. It was carved into a perfect replica of the logo for my brother's tech startup. I sat perfectly still. The air in my office suddenly felt thin. I checked my recent text messages. I checked my voicemail. I checked my personal email inbox. Nothing. No digital invitation. No casual text asking if I was free. No phone call. My own family had rented an extravagant Scottsdale rooftop to celebrate the exact day I was born, and they deliberately left me off the guest list. I closed the social media app. A cold, heavy weight settled in the pit of my stomach. This was not a careless oversight. You do not simply forget that your daughter shares a birthday with the son you are currently throwing a lavish gala for. This was an active, calculated choice. I picked up my phone and dialed my father. I forced my breathing to remain steady. I did not want to sound needy, and I refused to let my voice tremble. Thomas answered on the third ring. I could hear the clinking of glassware and the murmur of event coordinators bleeding through the speaker. Before I could even form a proper sentence, before I could ask why I was watching my own birthday party through a smartphone screen from a corporate office, his tone shifted into a defensive armor. "Victoria, do not be dramatic," he sighed into the receiver. His voice carried that familiar, patronizing edge he reserved specifically for me, a tone armed and ready to swat away my concerns like a nuisance. "I am not being dramatic, Dad," I replied, keeping my pitch even and measured. "I am looking at a video of a luxury event being thrown on the day I was born, an event for my twin brother, an event I was kept entirely ignorant of. Tyler needs this for networking." He cut in, rushing his words as if speaking faster would make his logic sound rational. "He is hosting crucial venture capitalists tonight. He needs to project success to secure his funding. The venue alone cost $15,000, Victoria. We are stretched incredibly thin right now. We can only afford one party this year. It is just business. You understand, right? You always understand." He did not wait for my answer. He did not wait to hear the silence stretching across the line. The call disconnected with a sharp click. I lowered the phone to my desk. The screen went dark, reflecting my own stoic expression. I did not cry. Crying is a biological response to unexpected pain, and this pain was far too familiar and calculated to warrant tears. Instead, a profound shift occurred in my mind. We can only afford one party. Those 7 words echoed in my head. My father delivered them as a plea for sympathy, a request for me to step aside and sacrifice my milestone for the sake of my brother's fragile ego. He wanted me to accept that resources were scarce and that Tyler's needs inherently outranked mine. But those words were not just cruel. They were a mathematical impossibility. I know exactly what my parents earn. My parents are retired public school administrators. Their monthly income is fixed, predictable, and modest. They clip coupons for groceries. They complain about the rising cost of utilities in the summer. They drive vehicles with over 100,000 miles on the odometer. I know their debt-to-income ratio because I am the invisible scaffolding holding their financial lives together. For the past 5 years, I have paid their property taxes. I cover their unexpected medical bills. I send monthly stipends that they casually refer to as my contribution to the household, despite the fact that I moved out a decade ago. My parents do not have $15,000 of disposable income sitting in a checking account. They could not afford a rooftop venue, a champagne pyramid, or a custom ice sculpture. They could not afford to host elite venture capitalists in Scottsdale. A sick realization began to bloom in my chest. if my parents did not have the capital to fund this extravagant display of wealth. There was only one place that money could have originated. I opened my secure banking application on my desktop computer. I clicked through my transaction history, scrolling past my mortgage payment, my utility bills, and my grocery expenses. I stopped on a line item dated exactly 3 weeks prior. A wire transfer. A very large, very specific wire transfer sent directly to my mother's joint checking account. I stared at the numbers glowing on the monitor. The digits aligned perfectly with the cost of the rooftop venue my father had just complained about. My family did not just exclude me from a milestone celebration. They used my own resources to build a monument to my brother. They leveraged my sense of duty to fund my own exclusion. The tightness in my chest dissolved, replaced by something much colder and far more dangerous. The sadness evaporated. In its place, a sharp analytical focus took hold. I was no longer an uninvited sister grieving a fractured family dynamic. I was a senior corporate auditor looking at a glaring misappropriation of funds. My family had treated my loyalty as a vulnerability. They assumed I would just absorb the financial hit, bury the emotional rejection, and continue playing the quiet, supportive daughter. They were wrong. If I was going to pay for a luxury event, I was going to manage the return on my investment. The rules of engagement had officially changed. My father wanted me to understand. Standing in my sunlit office, tracing the wire transfer receipt on my screen, I understood everything. And I knew exactly how I was going to leverage this betrayal to dismantle my brother's carefully curated illusion. The profession of auditing is often misunderstood by those outside the financial sector. People assume it is merely a matter of counting pennies or verifying tax forms. In reality, being a senior mergers and acquisitions auditor is akin to performing a forensic autopsy on a living, breathing corporate organism. I dissect financial lies for a living. When two companies plan to merge, or when an investment firm prepares to purchase a startup, they send someone like me into the boardroom. My job is to strip away the marketing jargon, bypass the charismatic presentations, and dig into the raw data. I look for the hidden liabilities. I search for the offshore accounts, the inflated user metrics, the phantom employees, and the cooked books. Over the past 7 years, I have built a reputation in Phoenix for possessing a terrifying attention to detail. I do not trust smiles. I do not trust handshakes. I trust bank statements, wire transfers, and notarized receipts. Numbers possess a certain elegant honesty. They never attempt to manipulate your emotions, and they never try to make you feel guilty for asking questions. Yet despite my rigorous professional training, I possessed a profound blind spot when it came to the people who shared my DNA. To understand the true depth of the betrayal unfolding on my computer screen, we must revisit a phone call that occurred exactly 21 days prior. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the middle of reviewing a complex portfolio for a client when my personal cell phone rang. The caller ID displayed my mother's name. Patricia rarely called me during business hours unless she required something tangible, usually a favor or a financial contribution disguised as a casual catch-up. When I answered, her voice was already trembling. She delivered a masterclass in fabricated panic. She claimed that a recent severe desert monsoon had compromised the structural integrity of their home. According to her frantic narrative, high winds had stripped away a massive section of clay tiles, exposing the underlying wood to torrential rain. She described water pooling in the attic, threatening to collapse the drywall ceiling directly into their living room. She spoke of impending black mold and thousands of dollars in secondary structural damage if the breach was not sealed immediately. Then came the hook. Patricia explained that their insurance deductible was prohibitively high and the claim process would take weeks. She had supposedly found an independent contractor willing to perform an emergency patch and full roof replacement, but he required an upfront cash deposit to bump them to the front of his 6-month waiting list. The amount he demanded was exactly $15,000. She cried. Real audible sobs echoed through the receiver. She told me my father was too proud to ask for help, that his blood pressure was spiking from the stress, and that they were terrified of losing the home they had lived in for 2 decades. I did not ask for a copy of the contractor's estimate. I did not request photographs of the water damage. I bypassed every single protocol of due diligence that defines my entire career. I heard my mother weeping, and the lingering instinct of the dutiful, obedient daughter overrode the sharp instincts of the auditor. I promised her I would handle it. Within 15 minutes of hanging up, I logged into my secure banking portal. I transferred $15,000 from my high-yield savings account directly into their joint checking account. On the digital transfer form in the small box designated for optional memos, I typed 3 words: emergency house repairs. Now, sitting in my sunlit office 3 weeks later, the memory of those tears felt like a physical strike to the jaw. I stared at the paused Instagram video on my secondary monitor. I looked at the imported palm trees swaying in the background. I looked at the velvet ropes, the custom neon signage, and the towering ice sculpture carved into the logo of Tyler's tech startup. I calculated the average cost of booking a premium rooftop venue in Scottsdale on a Saturday night. I factored in the open bar, the catering, the professional lighting, and the DJ booth. The arithmetic was simple, brutal, and undeniable. My $15,000 did not purchase asphalt shingles. It purchased a champagne pyramid. It purchased a temporary illusion of grandeur for a 30-year-old man who still needed his parents to subsidize his social life. This was not a mere lie of omission. This was targeted financial gaslighting. They recognized my stability, weaponized my empathy, and extracted my capital to throw a luxury gala that I was explicitly barred from attending. My father's earlier excuse about affording only one party suddenly took on a sickening new context. They did not just choose Tyler over me, they forced me to pay for the privilege of being discarded. A lesser person might have reacted with immediate explosive rage. Many siblings would have grabbed their car keys, driven straight to that Scottsdale venue, and caused a public scene. They would have shouted, thrown drinks, and demanded their money back in front of the event coordinators. I did none of those things. Screaming matches do not yield returns on investment. Emotional outbursts give toxic people exactly what they crave: the opportunity to label you unstable, thereby justifying their decision to exclude you in the first place. If I called my parents weeping, Patricia would simply twist the narrative. She would claim I misunderstood, or that the roof repair was cheaper than expected, or that they reallocated the funds because Tyler's mental health required a celebration. They had spent decades perfecting the art of rewriting history to suit their preferences. Instead of reaching for my phone to dial their number, I reached for my mouse. I navigated away from the social media tab and opened my banking application. I logged in, bypassed the two-factor authentication, and pulled up my transaction history for the previous month. I scrolled down until I found the specific wire transfer. The date, the exact dollar amount, the routing number of my parents' account, and the explicit memo reading emergency house repairs were all neatly documented on the screen. I tapped a sequence of keys on my keyboard, capturing a high-resolution screenshot of the digital receipt. I opened a fresh encrypted folder on my secure cloud drive. I named the folder Martin Family Audit. I saved the receipt inside. Then I downloaded the live video Patricia had posted, preserving the evidence of the Scottsdale venue, the neon sign, and the ice sculpture. I placed that file right next to the bank receipt. In that quiet, solitary moment, a profound psychological boundary snapped into place. The final tether of familial obligation severed cleanly. I stopped viewing Patricia and Thomas as my mother and father. I stopped viewing Tyler as my twin brother. I began treating my family exactly the way I treat a fraudulent corporate entity. They were no longer relatives, they were hostile actors who had misappropriated funds under false pretenses. They had executed a calculated scheme to defraud an investor. I closed the folders and leaned back in my ergonomic chair. A strange, serene calm washed over me. The dry desert light filtering through the glass felt warmer, sharper. I decided right then and there that I was not going to write off this loss. If I had unknowingly financed a $15,000 party, I was going to ensure I extracted every single penny's worth of entertainment out of that investment. To dismantle a fraud, you have to understand the target's specific vulnerabilities. You have to locate the load-bearing pillar of their deception and remove it with surgical precision. Tyler's entire existence was a carefully curated facade of wealth and success, but I knew the foundation was rotting. He was using this birthday bash for a very specific reason. My father had mentioned networking. He mentioned venture capitalists. My brother was a desperate man attempting to lure investors to a sinking ship. He was relying on the flashing lights and the expensive liquor to distract them from his hollow spreadsheets. He assumed the people holding the purse strings would be blinded by the Scottsdale skyline. He had no idea that the very people he was trying to impress were the exact same people who paid me to find the lies he was trying to hide. To fully comprehend the fatal misstep my brother made, you must first understand the fragile architecture of his entire existence. Tyler has always played the role of the visionary tech founder. He embodies every cliché of the modern startup culture, wearing his ambition like a designer suit, tailored to hide a malnourished frame. He resides in a downtown Scottsdale loft, characterized by exposed ductwork, polished concrete floors, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the financial district. The rent is exorbitant, and he does not own a single square foot of it. He drives a sleek European sports car that requires premium fuel he can barely afford, bound by a predatory lease agreement that strictly limits his mileage. His company, a software development firm, promising to revolutionize digital supply chain logistics, is essentially a vacuum that consumes capital and produces nothing but buzzwords. He employs a handful of young developers, operates out of a co-working space featuring cold brew on tap, and bleeds cash at an unsustainable rate. His lifestyle is a carefully curated illusion of wealth and inevitable triumph. That illusion is funded entirely by our parents' relentless enabling, and by direct extension my silent financial subsidies. My father and mother look at Tyler and see a burgeoning industry titan. They excuse his constant requests for money as necessary seed capital for a genius on the verge of a breakthrough. The depth of their delusion is only matched by their profound lack of interest in my own life. At family dinners, whenever the conversation briefly pivoted to my career, a noticeable glaze would settle over my parents' eyes. If someone asked what I did for a living, my mother would wave her hand dismissively and mutter something about taxes or bookkeeping. They categorized my profession as dull safe and inherently subordinate to Tyler's flashy entrepreneurial ventures. They never asked for the name of my firm. They never inquired about the caliber of my clients. They simply knew I possessed a steady paycheck, making me the designated safety net whenever Tyler's high-wire act faltered. That persistent ignorance became the most lethal weapon in my arsenal. Later that same Friday afternoon, as I sat in my office assembling the digital evidence of their $15,000 fraud, my phone vibrated with an incoming text message. It was from Tyler. I opened the notification and read the words glowing against the glass screen. "Hey sis, sorry you cannot make it tomorrow. VIP list only for the venue super strict capacity. Going to be pitching to the Vanguard Investment Group. Wish me luck." Appended to the very end of that brief paragraph was a single emoji depicting two hands pressed together in prayer. I stared at that tiny digital image for a long time. It was a fascinating detail, a small pebble of passive aggression dropped into the stagnant pond of our sibling dynamic. That prayer hands emoji was not a symbol of gratitude or genuine apology. It was a calculated smirk. He was rubbing the exclusion in my face, pretending to be sympathetic while simultaneously flaunting his elite guest list. He wanted to make certain I knew my absence was not an oversight but a deliberate demotion. He was telling me that I simply did not make the cut for his high society orbit. Tyler genuinely believed he was playing a brilliant game of strategic dominance. He wanted to establish his position as the successful twin, the sibling worthy of velvet ropes and exclusive rooftop cabanas. He was trying to inflict emotional pain, assuming my reaction would be quiet hurt and lingering jealousy. Instead, reading that text message felt like watching a burglar meticulously pick the lock on a bank vault, entirely unaware that he had just bypassed the security system of a maximum security prison. Tyler was missing a catastrophic piece of information. He explicitly named his target. He proudly announced that he was using this lavish stolen birthday party to pitch the Vanguard Investment Group. Vanguard is a premier venture capital firm headquartered in Arizona. They specialize in high-risk, high-reward technology acquisitions. They are known for writing staggering checks to promising startups, often rescuing founding companies with sudden injections of Series A funding. Tyler desperately needed Vanguard. According to the rumors I had heard through mutual acquaintances, his startup was merely weeks away from missing payroll. He needed a $3 million lifeline to keep his leased loft, his leased car, and his fabricated identity intact. He intended to woo the managing partners with premium liquor-thumping music and a rooftop view, hoping the sheer spectacle of the $15,000 party would distract them from asking hard questions about his revenue model. He viewed Vanguard as his ultimate salvation. What my brother did not know, what my parents never bothered to learn during all those years of ignoring my boring math job, was the exact nature of my employment. I do not work for Vanguard Investment Group. I work for the independent auditing agency that Vanguard Investment Group hires whenever they are considering a multi-million-dollar acquisition. I am the gatekeeper. I am the person Vanguard sends into the dark corners of a startup's financial history to determine if the founders are telling the truth. I am their lead external auditor. My job is to protect their capital from charlatans. Over the past several years, I have saved Vanguard from acquiring dozens of hollow companies. The managing partners trust my analytical models more than they trust their own instincts. They do not sign term sheets until I hand them a finalized dossier detailing every hidden risk, every inflated metric, and every fundamental flaw in a target company's business plan. Tyler sent me a text message bragging about his exclusive party, unaware that he was bragging to his judge and jury. He was pitching a firm that explicitly relies on my signature to release funds. I set my phone down on the desk. The sheer symmetry of the situation was almost difficult to process. My family had stolen my money to build a stage for Tyler. They barred me from attending the performance, yet they unknowingly handed me the script, the lighting controls, and the power to drop the curtain on the entire production. I did not reply to his text. I did not send a sarcastic remark or a weeping complaint. I simply opened a new, highly classified folder on my encrypted workstation. I had a significant amount of work to accomplish before the sun set. Tyler was preparing for a party, but I needed to prepare an autopsy. The venue was secured, his guest list was finalized, but I held the undeniable data. The stage was set for a collision, and only one of us knew the true rules of the game we were about to play. The irony of the situation settled over my sunlit office like a heavy blanket. Vanguard Investment Group is not a careless organization. They represent the apex of the Arizona venture capital food chain. When they consider injecting $3 million into a struggling tech startup, they do not base their decisions on charisma or firm handshakes. They hire my agency to perform a forensic excavation. They pay us to dismantle the target company down to its studs and report back on whether the foundation can hold weight. Exactly 14 days before my mother uploaded that glowing rooftop video, my managing director had dropped a thick dossier onto my desk. The tab on the file bore the name of a digital supply chain logistics firm. It was an entity registered under a generic corporate umbrella, a shell corporation designed to sound innovative and sleek. I opened the cover, scanned the executive summary, and immediately recognized the primary founder listed on the incorporation documents: Tyler Martin. In the corporate sector, a direct familial connection is typically grounds for immediate recusal. I should have walked the file back to my director and requested a reassignment to preserve objectivity. I chose to keep the folder. I did not disclose the biological link because I knew my assessment would remain entirely clinical. My brother was simply another subject on a balance sheet. Furthermore, Tyler had spent years distancing his professional persona from our family, preferring to present himself as a self-made prodigy who materialized out of thin air. I decided to honor that distance. I kept my mouth shut and went to work. For 2 solid weeks, I had been staring into the financial abyss of my brother's creation. The numbers painted a portrait of a man drowning while pretending to walk on water. The user acquisition metrics were a masterpiece of modern fiction. Tyler reported thousands of daily active users, but a deeper dive into the server logs revealed that a significant portion of those accounts were bots purchased in bulk from overseas server farms to artificially inflate traffic. Real human engagement was plummeting. The few genuine clients who signed up for his software trials abandoned the platform within 72 hours, citing a clunky interface and broken features. His cash burn rate was even more terrifying. A healthy startup consumes capital to build infrastructure or hire elite engineering talent. Tyler was hemorrhaging funds on vanity projects. The ledger showed staggering monthly payments for the premium downtown office space, catered artisan lunches for his 5 employees, and a relentless digital marketing campaign that yielded 0 tangible conversions. He was paying his sparse development team with short-term high-interest bridge loans. The company possessed less than 4 months of operational runway before facing total insolvency. It was not a functioning business. It was a financial sinkhole dressed up in Silicon Valley buzzwords. I had not shared a single syllable of these findings with the Vanguard managing partners yet. I kept the data segregated on my encrypted drive. I was meticulously building a comprehensive, undeniable report. A standard review might flag a few concerning spending habits, but I was preparing a surgical strike. I gathered vendor invoices, matched them against phantom revenue streams, and mapped out the exact date his startup would inevitably default on its obligations. Knowing this bleak reality made Tyler's text message about his VIP birthday bash incredibly fascinating to dissect. I understood his strategy perfectly. It is a common, desperate tactic utilized by failing founders in the tech sector. When the spreadsheets tell a story of impending ruin, founders attempt to change the narrative through sheer spectacle. Tyler was orchestrating a sensory overload. He secured the $15,000 rooftop venue because he needed to manufacture an aura of exclusive, undeniable success. He intended to surround the 3 Vanguard managing partners with attractive attendees, top-shelf liquor, and the intoxicating energy of a Saturday night in Scottsdale. He wanted to schmooze them. He wanted the partners to stand on that terrace, look out over the glittering desert skyline, and feel the momentum of a winner. He calculated that if he treated them like royalty feeding their egos in a VIP cabana, they might overlook the missing quarterly reports. They might sign the $3 million term sheet based on the manufactured hype rather than the hard math. He was relying entirely on smoke and mirrors. He assumed these veteran investors would be dazzled by the neon signs and the custom ice sculptures paid for by my stolen savings. What my brother failed to grasp is that men who manage billion-dollar portfolios do not get distracted by a free glass of champagne. Richard, David, and Jonathan are the managing partners of Vanguard, and they are notorious for their ruthless pragmatism. They are older, seasoned operators who have seen countless flashy entrepreneurs crash and burn. They attend these lavish events, drink the free liquor, smile for the cameras, and then wait for my final report before authorizing a single dime. Tyler did not know the woman holding the red pen over his company's survival was his uninvited twin sister. He had spent his entire life viewing me as a background character, a quiet reservoir of funds to be tapped whenever his ambitions exceeded his grasp. He believed my career consisted of filing tax returns in a dusty cubicle. He never bothered to learn that I am the gatekeeper to the very vault he was trying to pry open. The layers of our conflict were now firmly locked into place. The board was set, and the pieces were positioned for a brutal collision. Tyler held the venue. He had the music, the floral arrangements, the velvet ropes, and the stolen capital. He possessed the audience he had curated to witness his triumphant ascension. I held the data. I possessed the bank records, the server logs, the debt schedules, and the unvarnished truth. Sitting in my office as the Friday afternoon shadows stretched across the floor, a new problem presented itself. I could simply submit my forensic report to Vanguard on Monday morning and let the inevitable rejection crush his funding dreams. That would be the standard professional protocol. However, standard protocol felt insufficient. My parents had weaponized my empathy to fund my own exclusion. They had stolen my money to build his stage. Allowing the rejection to happen quietly behind closed corporate doors would not balance the personal ledger. If Tyler was using my financial resources to host the Vanguard partners on the night of our shared birthday, I needed to intercept his audience. I needed to ensure that his expensive VIP section remained entirely vacant when it mattered most. To execute that maneuver, I could not just be the auditor reading spreadsheets in the dark. I had to step into the light and become the host. The thought sparked a new intricate plan, setting the wheels in motion for a secondary gathering that would cost a fraction of the price, but deliver a fatal blow. Instead of succumbing to the predictable grief that typically follows familial rejection, I channeled my cognitive resources into logistical execution. Society often expects marginalized daughters to react to intentional snubs with dramatic weeping or desperate pleas for validation. My mother certainly anticipated that I would eventually call her my voice, thick with sorrow, begging for an explanation regarding my exclusion. Patricia craved that emotional leverage. She wanted the power dynamic firmly established, proving once again that Tyler dictated the emotional weather of our household. I refused to provide that satisfaction. The revelation of the stolen $15,000 eradicated any lingering sentimentality I held toward my biological relatives. I did not require their approval, and I certainly did not need a neon-illuminated rooftop to commemorate my third decade on this earth. I decided to host my own celebration, one constructed on my exact terms, entirely devoid of the toxic enabling that defined the Martin family. I directed my browser away from the fraudulent bank transfer receipt and navigated toward the website of an exclusive Michelin-recognized resort situated in the heart of Paradise Valley. For those unfamiliar with the specific geography of Arizona, Paradise Valley represents the exact antithesis of the chaotic artificial energy found in downtown Scottsdale. It is an enclave of generational wealth characterized by sprawling desert estates, profound quiet, and impenetrable discretion. Individuals do not travel to Paradise Valley to be seen by the masses. They go there to conduct serious negotiations away from prying eyes. I secured a private soundproof dining chamber at their premier restaurant for Saturday evening. The reservation required a $2,000 deposit covering a multi-course tasting menu and premium wine pairings curated by a master sommelier. Compared to the exorbitant fortune my parents squandered on my twin, my expenditure was astonishingly modest. Yet the atmosphere I purchased was infinitely more lethal. There would be no flashing strobe lights, no blaring club music, and no melting ice sculptures shaped like a corporate logo. The chamber featured rich mahogany paneling, dim ambient lighting, and thick wooden doors that ensured total confidentiality. It was an environment designed for apex predators, which perfectly suited the specific guest list I was preparing to assemble. I opened my personal email client to begin drafting the formal invitations. The recipient field remained free of biological connections. I did not invite my parents. I excluded the aunts, uncles, and cousins who had spent 30 years watching me fade into the background while applauding every minor achievement my brother managed to stumble through. My guest list consisted of exactly 4 individuals, counting myself. The remaining 3 chairs were exclusively reserved for the managing partners of Vanguard Investment Group. Richard serves as the senior partner at Vanguard, a man whose reputation across the southwestern financial sector is legendary. He is pragmatic, ruthlessly efficient, and fundamentally allergic to performative nonsense. 3 years ago, I protected his firm from acquiring a biotech manufacturing company that was actively falsifying health compliance records. I caught a glaring discrepancy buried deep within an obscure supply chain invoice. That single discovery prevented a catastrophic $50 million loss. Since that pivotal moment, Richard and his co-founders, David and Jonathan, have treated my forensic audits as unquestionable gospel. They respect my analytical intellect far more than they value any flashy presentation a desperate entrepreneur might orchestrate in a crowded nightclub. I crafted the electronic message with surgical precision. I knew Tyler had already sent them digital VIP passes for his sprawling event. I also understood that seasoned venture capitalists view obligatory social gatherings as tedious, exhausting chores. They attend them out of professional courtesy, not genuine desire. I offered them an alternative that appealed directly to their core business instincts and their preference for efficiency. The subject line was concise, strictly professional, and mathematically impossible for them to ignore. It read private dinner and preliminary audit review regarding the Series A funding for Tyler Martin. In the body of the text, I formally invited the trio to join me at the Paradise Valley Resort to celebrate my upcoming birthday. I seamlessly wove the professional imperative into the personal milestone. I explained that I had concluded my forensic analysis of the target software firm significantly ahead of schedule. I suggested that rather than standing on a crowded terrace enduring loud music and forced networking, they might prefer a quiet, exceptional meal where we could examine the raw data before the market opened on Monday morning. I pressed the send button and watched the progress bar vanish across my monitor. The response was practically instantaneous. Operating at the highest echelons of venture capital requires an intense instinct for self-preservation, and these men possessed razor-sharp reflexes. Within 45 minutes, all three partners had replied to my message. Richard responded first, confirming his attendance, while adding a brief note expressing his profound relief at avoiding the Scottsdale party scene. David and Jonathan followed shortly thereafter. They accepted the invitation without raising a single question. They logically assumed this was a high-level strategic debriefing brilliantly disguised as a birthday celebration. They were entirely correct. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, feeling the cool air conditioning cycle through my quiet office. The trap was officially set, and the bait was the unvarnished, undeniable truth regarding a failing startup. The beautiful symmetry of the impending situation was almost intoxicating to contemplate. My brother was currently sprinting around his leased loft, agonizing over custom-tailored suits and rehearsing his charismatic elevator pitches in the mirror. He was preparing to host a lavish stolen party specifically designed to impress 3 specific billionaires. He was counting on their physical presence to validate his entire fabricated existence, hoping their attendance would signal to other local networking attendees that his company was a guaranteed success. He viewed them as his ultimate salvation. He had no idea that his coveted guests had just officially defected. He did not know they had chosen a quiet dinner with his invisible sister over his extravagant VIP cabana. Saturday night was going to arrive, the neon signs would glow, the expensive liquor would flow freely, and Tyler was going to stand in the center of his rented kingdom, realizing his royal court was entirely empty. He was about to throw a colossal gala for a guest list that would never step foot inside the building. He was funding his own public humiliation. I locked my computer terminal, gathered my belongings, and walked out of the glass building into the searing desert heat. For the first time in my existence, I genuinely looked forward to celebrating the anniversary of my birth. I had successfully wrested control of my own narrative away from the people who had exploited me for decades. However, maintaining a secret within a family defined by enmeshment and gossip is a nearly impossible feat. I severely underestimated the sheer desperation of a mother protecting her favored child. Patricia possessed a terrifying sixth sense whenever her son faced a legitimate threat. I assumed my private dining reservation would remain hidden until the guests actually took their seats. I failed to account for a mutual acquaintance who worked in the hospitality sector. The moment my name appeared on that exclusive booking ledger, whispers began to circulate. Word travels incredibly fast when you disrupt the established social hierarchy. By Saturday morning, the news of my competing dinner party would reach Patricia, igniting a frantic, vicious counteroffensive that I did not initially anticipate. Conflict rarely remains concealed when you share a bloodline with someone who treats family dynamics like a zero-sum game. I woke up on Saturday morning feeling surprisingly rested. The Arizona sun was already spilling through the horizontal blinds of my bedroom, casting neat, orderly stripes of light across the hardwood floor. I walked into the kitchen, started the coffee machine, and prepared for a day of quiet anticipation. Then my phone chimed against the granite countertop. The notification was not a scheduling update from the Vanguard partners. It was an audio file forwarded by a woman named Lauren, one of my oldest confidants. To comprehend how my private reservation leaked to my mother, you must understand the social ecosystem of Phoenix. While it is a sprawling metropolitan hub, the upper echelons of the hospitality industry operate like a very small, tightly knit neighborhood. A booking coordinator named Melissa worked at the Paradise Valley Resort. Melissa also happened to serve on the same suburban charity committee as my mother. Melissa noticed my full name on the reservation ledger for the exclusive dining chamber. Believing she was sharing delightful news, the coordinator sent a quick congratulatory text message to my parents early that morning, assuming they were well aware of my milestone birthday plans. That innocent passing message acted as a spark dropped directly onto dry tinder. Panic instantly set in for Patricia. To understand my mother's reaction, you have to examine the fragile architecture of her psychology. She operates as the chief public relations officer for Tyler's manufactured existence. She cannot tolerate any narrative where her son is not the undisputed celebrated protagonist. The mere concept of me hosting a competing gathering on his designated day felt like an unforgivable act of treason. She did not interpret my dinner as a harmless, personal celebration. She viewed it as a direct, calculated threat to the optics of Tyler's $15,000 rooftop gala. Instead of contacting me directly to ask about my evening, Patricia deployed a strategy of aggressive containment and isolation. She assumed my guest list consisted entirely of my personal social circle. She pictured a handful of women I had known since university peers who were well aware of my marginalized status within the Martin family. Patricia wanted to ensure that my private dining room remained completely empty. She wanted me to sit alone at a mahogany table, abandoned and humiliated. It was a vicious, unnecessary layer of sabotage designed to break my spirit, forcing me to surrender and fall back into my designated role as the invisible daughter. I stood in my kitchen, sipping the dark coffee, and pressed play on the forwarded audio file. My mother's voice filled the quiet space. It was a masterful performance of synthetic maternal concern rehearsed and weaponized. "Hello, Lauren." Patricia began her pitch, wavering with manufactured distress. "This is Victoria's mother. I am calling because we are all just terribly worried about her. She is experiencing a rather severe mental breakdown over some unfortunate miscommunications regarding her brother's party. She booked a dinner tonight, and I fear it is just going to be a depressing pity party. We really need everyone to rally around Tyler right now for his big venture capital pitch. It would mean the world to us if you skipped her dinner and came to the Scottsdale rooftop instead. We have an open bar, and Tyler could really use the support." The recording was breathtaking in its cruelty. She did not merely want to ruin my evening. She actively tried to poach my perceived guests to artificially inflate Tyler's attendance numbers. She weaponized the concept of mental health to paint me as an unstable, jealous sister throwing a tantrum. A few minutes later, another close peer of mine, a woman named Rachel, forwarded a nearly identical audio recording to my inbox. My mother was working her way through my contact list, burning my reputation to the ground, just to ensure her golden child had a larger crowd drinking his stolen liquor. I listened to both recordings a second time. I did not shed a single tear. The audio only reinforced the cold, impenetrable armor I had constructed around my heart over the past 48 hours. Patricia was fighting a war built entirely on false assumptions. Her desperation was palpable, but her intelligence gathering was severely flawed. She assumed I operated on the same petty, socially driven wavelength as her favored son. She believed I required a cheering squad of girlfriends to validate my existence. The profound irony of her smear campaign was almost beautiful. My mother had no idea that the individuals invited to my Paradise Valley dinner were not local peers susceptible to neighborhood gossip. My guests were 50-year-old financial titans who managed billions of dollars in institutional wealth. Richard David and Jonathan did not possess her phone number. They did not serve on charity committees with her friends. They were insulated by layers of executive assistants and corporate security. They existed in a stratosphere of power and influence that Patricia could not even fathom, let alone access. Her frantic sabotage was bouncing harmlessly off the walls of my personal life, entirely missing the corporate trap I had set for Tyler. I walked over to my secure laptop and connected my phone. I extracted the audio files containing her unhinged voicemails. I opened the encrypted directory labeled Martin Family Audit. I dragged the digital recordings and dropped them right next to the fraudulent bank transfer receipt and the downloaded video of the neon signs. Every piece of evidence was meticulously cataloged, building an undeniable portfolio of their deception. That simple act of archiving her betrayal finalized my emotional detachment. I was officially done bleeding for people who actively went out of their way to cut me. They wanted me isolated, broken, and compliant. They wanted me to finance their delusions while silently accepting their public humiliation. They were about to discover the staggering cost of underestimating the daughter they threw away. The desert sun climbed higher into the sky, baking the Phoenix asphalt and pushing the temperature well past the century mark. The hours ticked away with a slow, deliberate rhythm, drawing us closer to the evening. Tyler was likely standing in his leased loft, adjusting his tailored suit, entirely ignorant of the storm gathering over his head. Patricia was likely sitting in her living room, patting herself on the back, believing she had successfully derailed my birthday plans by turning my friends against me. They were both marching blindly toward the edge of a sheer cliff, holding hands and smiling for a camera that was not even recording. As dusk began to settle over the surrounding mountains, painting the desert sky in shades of bruised purple and burning orange, the stage was officially set. The lavish preparations in Scottsdale were concluding. The neon lights were switching on, casting a toxic blue glow over the velvet ropes and the imported palm trees. Tyler was preparing to welcome the most important investors of his life into an exclusive area designed just for them. He had no idea he was opening the doors to a VIP section that was destined to become a ghost town. Saturday night arrived, bringing with it the distinct lingering heat that defines summer evenings in the Arizona desert. The sun finally dipped below the jagged horizon, painting the sky in deep shades of indigo and charcoal. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, making final adjustments to my attire. I did not choose a sequined dress or anything designed to scream for attention. I selected a tailored charcoal gray sheath dress paired with simple silver earrings. The reflection staring back at me did not look like a woman attending a birthday celebration. I looked like an executive preparing to close the most consequential deal of her career. I ordered a private car service, leaving my own vehicle parked in the driveway. As the black sedan glided onto the highway heading toward Paradise Valley, my phone rested silently in my lap. I watched the city lights blur past the tinted windows. Downtown Scottsdale glowed in the distance, a chaotic cluster of rooftop bars, pulsing bass lines, and manufactured exclusivity. Somewhere in that luminous maze, my twin brother was holding court, spending the $15,000 he had extracted from my bank account under the guise of an emergency roof repair. I arrived at the resort exactly 15 minutes before my scheduled reservation. The contrast between my chosen environment and Tyler's gaudy venue could not have been more pronounced. The Paradise Valley establishment was shrouded in tranquility. Desert landscaping framed the entrance, illuminated by soft, amber ground lights. A valet opened my door and a hostess greeted me by name, guiding me through a hushed corridor lined with vintage wine cellars. She opened heavy solid oak double doors to reveal my private dining chamber. The space was impeccable. 4 high-backed leather chairs sat around a circular mahogany table. Crystal glasses gleamed under the warm glow of a central chandelier. The ambient noise of the main restaurant was entirely muted, swallowed by the soundproof walls. I took my seat facing the entrance. I placed my phone face up on the polished wood. At 8 o'clock precisely, the digital screen illuminated. The device buzzed, signaling an incoming barrage of text messages. The sender was my cousin Marcus. To provide proper context, Marcus is a pragmatic, observant relative who works in commercial logistics. He has never bought into the mythology surrounding my brother. Marcus views Tyler as a theatrical performer rather than a legitimate entrepreneur. However, Marcus is also incredibly frugal. If someone offers him premium liquor and catered food free of charge, he will happily attend the event stand in the corner and silently judge the spectacle. I knew Marcus would be at the Scottsdale rooftop, and I knew he would provide unvarnished real-time updates regarding the unfolding disaster. The first message contained a photograph. Marcus had captured the scene inside the VIP cabana. The image was a masterpiece of squandered capital. Tyler had cordoned off a sprawling section of the terrace with thick velvet ropes. Two imposing security guards stood at the entrance, ensuring only the elite could pass. In the center of the plush leather seating arrangement sat three oversized silver buckets. Inside those buckets rested bottles of champagne that retailed for $800 each. Ignited sparklers were strapped to the bottlenecks, shooting showers of brilliant gold sparks into the night air, demanding the attention of every single patron in the establishment. It was a grand, expensive gesture designed to overwhelm the senses. There was only one glaring problem. The leather booths were vacant. The second text from Marcus contained a brief, sharp observation. "Your brother is sweating through his blazer. The investors have not shown up yet." I swiped the screen, reading the subsequent messages as they arrived in rapid succession. The pebbles of Tyler's impending professional disaster were delicious to consume. Marcus described Tyler pacing the length of the cordoned area. My brother was wearing a custom midnight blue suit, a garment that undoubtedly cost more than a month of rent. He kept lifting his left wrist, checking his expensive watch every 3 minutes, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. The Vanguard partners were late. In the corporate sector, being 15 minutes delayed is considered a minor scheduling hiccup. Being 30 minutes tardy is a deliberate power play. Being an hour absent is a loud, undeniable message of disinterest. By 8:15, the situation on the rooftop began to deteriorate. The networking crowd my mother had so desperately tried to expand was thoroughly enjoying the amenities. Local influencers, mid-level managers, and opportunistic acquaintances flooded the general admission area. They were happily drinking the premium liquor I had unknowingly financed. They took selfies next to the melting ice sculpture bearing Tyler's corporate logo. They laughed, danced to the deafening music, and consumed the expensive catered appetizers. Yet socially and professionally, Tyler was standing in an entirely empty room. The people he actually needed, the men holding the $3 million lifeline required to salvage his dying startup, were ghosts. The freeloaders did not care about digital supply chain logistics. They did not possess the capital to save his leased loft or his European sports car. They were merely extras in a movie Tyler was directing, a film that had suddenly lost its primary audience. My phone buzzed again. Marcus provided another live update. He is yelling at his phone now, poking the screen like it owes him money. I could vividly picture the rising panic gripping my brother's chest. Tyler was frantically texting the executive assistants employed by Vanguard Investment Group. He was sending desperate, overly casual messages, asking if the partners needed directions or if their designated driver had encountered traffic. Those messages were met with impenetrable silence. The digital delivery receipts likely confirmed the texts were read, but no replies materialized. Desperation breeds humiliation. According to Marcus, Tyler abandoned text messaging and began making actual phone calls. He stood in the corner of his VIP section, pressing the device to his ear, plugging his other ear with a finger to block out the thumping bass of the DJ booth. He was undoubtedly being routed directly to automated voicemail systems. He was leaving pleading messages for billionaires while surrounded by strangers drinking his stolen alcohol. The anxiety began to crack his carefully cultivated golden child facade. The swagger evaporated. The confident visionary tech founder melted away, leaving behind a terrified 30-year-old man who realized his house of cards was caught in a hurricane. He snapped at a wait person who offered him a fresh napkin. He ordered the security guards to clear a path to the elevator, staring at the sliding metal doors, praying for Richard, David, and Jonathan to step out and validate his existence. Every single minute that ticked by eroded another layer of his manufactured identity. He had spent his entire life relying on grand spectacles and parental bailouts to shield him from consequences. Tonight the spectacle was failing, and our parents could not write a check large enough to purchase the respect of Vanguard Investment Group. I sat in my silent, climate-controlled sanctuary across the city, sipping a glass of iced, sparkling water. I did not reply to Marcus. I simply locked my phone and placed it face down on the mahogany table. The emotional turbulence of my past, the decades of being overlooked, dismissed, and financially exploited, felt incredibly distant. The trap I had engineered was executing flawlessly, requiring zero additional input from me. Tyler was financing his own public destruction, utilizing the exact funds he had stolen from me to build the stage for his humiliation. A profound stillness settled over the private dining room. The heavy oak doors remained firmly shut, insulating me from the chaos of the outside world. I smoothed the fabric of my charcoal dress and folded my hands neatly on my lap. The preliminary stage of the evening was complete. The decoy venue had successfully trapped the fraud. Now it was time for the true transaction to commence. At 8:30 on the dot, the brass handle on the heavy double doors clicked softly. The hinges swung open, breaking the silence of my chamber. The maitre d' stepped inside, bowing his head slightly in deference, gesturing toward the entrance. Behind him stood three men dressed in impeccable, understated business attire, carrying leather portfolios rather than birthday gifts. The true guests of honor had arrived, oblivious to the panic unfolding across the desert valley, ready to review the numbers that would seal my brother's fate. The heavy oak doors clicked shut, severing the private dining chamber from the ambient murmur of the resort. Richard walked in first, setting the pace for the evening. He is a man who built his initial fortune in early telecommunications networks before founding Vanguard Investment Group. He possesses the unblinking gaze of a falcon and a profound distaste for inefficiency. Right behind him came David, a former corporate actuary who analyzes financial risk with chilling precision, and Jonathan, a former data architect tasked with translating emerging tech trends into actionable investments. They did not enter the room carrying the chaotic energy of a nightclub. They moved with the quiet, deliberate confidence of individuals who dictate the economic weather of the entire southwestern region. Richard extended his hand, offering a firm, warm greeting. He wished me a happy birthday, his tone conveying genuine professional respect. Jonathan handed me an understated woven basket wrapped in a simple silk ribbon. It contained imported truffle oil, aged balsamic vinegar, and rare coffee beans sourced from a private estate. It was a gesture of refined appreciation, a stark departure from the performative champagne buckets currently melting on a Scottsdale terrace. They took their seats around the circular mahogany table, settling into the plush leather chairs. A discreet server appeared, pouring glasses of crisp, sparkling water and presenting menus printed on heavy, textured paper. There were no neon signs blinding our vision. There was no pulsing bass line vibrating through the floorboards. The air smelled of roasted rosemary and polished wood. We ordered a round of appetizers consisting of seared scallops with a citrus glaze and artisan charcuterie. The resident sommelier presented a bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon from a boutique Napa Valley vineyard, decanting the dark crimson liquid with practiced elegance. As the first course arrived, our conversation drifted toward the broader economic landscape. We discussed the shifting dynamics of Arizona commercial real estate, specifically the zoning regulations affecting new industrial parks outside of Phoenix. David inquired about a recent corporate merger I had audited the previous quarter. He asked highly specific questions regarding the hidden pension liabilities I had uncovered during that acquisition. We engaged in a complex, elevated dialogue. They treated me as an equal, a peer, sitting at the table, rather than a subordinate tasked with fetching coffee or a mere sibling standing in the shadow of a golden child. The discussion eventually transitioned to the primary reason Vanguard was currently exploring the digital supply chain sector. Jonathan explained their investment philosophy. Phoenix is rapidly becoming a central distribution hub for the western half of the country. Vanguard wanted to acquire software capable of streamlining freight logistics. This strategic goal explained why Tyler had managed to secure a preliminary meeting with them in the first place. His shell company utilized all the correct industry buzzwords. He promised them an automated, flawless routing system. He sold them a vision of the future. I sat there sipping my wine, knowing full well his software was barely functioning, and his user base was artificially inflated by automated bots. While lifting the crystal glass to my lips, my mind briefly traveled back across the city to the manufactured disaster unfolding downtown. The cinematic juxtaposition was striking. Tyler was likely sweating through the collar of his tailored suit, surrounded by opportunistic strangers who cared nothing for his actual well-being. He was trapped under the glaring lights of his own deception, desperately trying to salvage a shattered illusion. He was bleeding capital, spending 15,000 stolen dollars to entertain a room full of ghosts. He purchased a circus, hoping the loud music would deafen the investors to the hollow echo of his bank accounts. Here I sat in a soundproof sanctuary. I was spending a mere $2,000 to orchestrate the collapse of an empire. The atmosphere radiated quiet power. We were breaking bread, sharing rare vintages, and analyzing market trends in total seclusion. I did not need to shout over a DJ to be heard. My voice carried weight simply because these three men valued the intellect behind it. Tyler believed dominance was established by standing behind velvet ropes and denying people entry. I understood that true dominance is established by holding the pen that signs the term sheet. The evening progressed with flawless execution. The main courses of dry, aged prime cuts and roasted seasonal vegetables were consumed. The plates were silently cleared away by the attentive waitstaff, leaving only our wine glasses and small porcelain cups of espresso. The subtle hum of casual networking began to fade, replaced by a sharper, more focused energy. The relaxed posture of the dinner companions vanished as the predator instinct of the venture capitalists slowly surfaced to the forefront of the room. The digital clock on the wall crept past 9:30. Richard adjusted the cuffs of his pristine dress shirt. He leaned back into the leather chair, resting his forearms on the mahogany surface. He picked up his wine glass by the stem, swirling the dark liquid in a slow, hypnotic circle. He locked his sharp eyes onto mine, his expression shifting from a celebratory guest to a ruthless financier. So Victoria, Richard began his voice, dropping an octave, echoing slightly in the quiet chamber. You mentioned in your invitation that you had compiled preliminary findings on your brother's startup. We were originally scheduled to attend his bash tonight, but frankly we trust your forensic numbers far more than his rooftop parties. What exactly are we looking at? The question hung in the air, heavy with consequence. The trap was officially sprung. The casual birthday celebration instantly morphed into a corporate execution chamber. David pulled a silver pen from his breast pocket, clicking it open, ready to take notes. Jonathan leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, his eyes narrowing with intense curiosity. Tyler's entire future rested inside the leather portfolio sitting near my feet. He had excluded me from his celebration, assuming my absence would grant him the spotlight. Instead, his absence from this mahogany table granted me the floor. I reached down, my fingers wrapping around the cool leather of my briefcase, preparing to release the avalanche of data that would bury his illusion forever. I reached down and unclasped the brass locks of my leather briefcase. The sound was sharp, cutting through the quiet ambiance of the soundproof dining chamber. I extracted 3 identical spiral-bound dossiers. The covers were a heavy slate gray, devoid of any marketing logos, bright colors, or desperate branding. I slid the first folder across the polished mahogany toward Richard, then handed the remaining copies to David and Jonathan. I did not smile. I did not lean forward to eagerly anticipate their reactions. I sat back in my chair, resting my hands in my lap, adopting the precise posture I utilize whenever I deliver a fatal diagnosis to a corporate entity. At that exact moment, a lesser person might have surrendered to the intoxicating urge to gloat. The temptation to expose the personal betrayal was undeniable. I could have easily informed these 3 billionaires that the very entrepreneur they were evaluating was currently standing on a rooftop across town, throwing a lavish party funded by my stolen savings. I could have revealed the deep, bitter irony of my exclusion from a birthday celebration I unwittingly financed. I kept my mouth shut. Venting personal grievances in a professional setting diminishes credibility. Blurring the line between family drama and forensic accounting would only make me appear vindictive. My objective was not to seek sympathy for a stolen $15,000. My objective was to orchestrate the clinical execution of a $3 million investment. I let the raw data do the talking. David was the first to open the dossier. He retrieved a silver pen from his pocket and uncapped it, his eyes tracking the initial spreadsheet. Jonathan adjusted his glasses, flipping straight to the technical back-end analysis. "Gentlemen," I began, my voice steady and measured. "What you are looking at is the unvarnished reality of the supply chain logistics software currently requesting your capital. I ask you to turn to page 4, specifically the user acquisition and retention metrics." The crisp rustle of heavy paper echoed around the table. "The founder presented you with a pitch deck boasting thousands of daily active users," I continued. "However, a deep forensic review of their server logs reveals a staggering deception. A majority of those accounts are automated bots purchased in bulk from overseas click farms to artificially inflate digital traffic. Real human engagement is practically non-existent. When genuine logistics clients sign up for a trial, they abandon the platform within 48 hours. The interface is clunky, the routing algorithms fail under load, and the promised automation features are essentially vaporware." Jonathan frowned, tracing a line graph with his index finger. "The code architecture isn't proprietary," he noted, his tone laced with sudden disappointment. "It looks like they patched together open-source frameworks." "Exactly," I affirmed. "It is a hollow shell. Now please turn your attention to page 7, the cash burn rate." Richard adjusted his posture, his sharp eyes scanning the ledger I had meticulously reconstructed. "A functional tech startup consumes capital to build robust infrastructure or acquire elite talent," I explained. "This firm is hemorrhaging funds on vanity projects. The founder has prioritized superficial aesthetics over substance. The lease for their downtown Scottsdale office consumes 20% of their monthly operating budget. They are spending exorbitant amounts on catered lunches, luxury car leases, hidden as corporate expenses, and marketing campaigns that yield zero tangible conversions. To meet their sparse payroll obligations, they are currently utilizing high-interest bridge loans. The company possesses less than 4 months of operational runway left. They have zero viable path to profitability." I paused, allowing the gravity of the financial ruin to settle over the table. I reached for my crystal glass and took a slow, deliberate sip of sparkling water. The ice clinked softly against the rim. I set the glass back down, meeting Richard's unwavering gaze. "It is a house of cards," I said softly, delivering the final blow with chilling neutrality. "Investing $3 million into this entity is not a seed round. It is a rescue mission." The 3 managing partners read the documents in total silence. For 5 agonizing minutes, the only sounds in the room were the faint hum of the resort climate control system and the scratching of David's pen as he circled glaring liabilities. They did not shout. They did not express outrage. Billionaires do not throw tantrums when they discover a bad deal. They simply close their checkbooks. Richard was the final partner to finish the executive summary. He closed the slate-gray folder. The heavy paper landed against the table with a definitive thud. He removed his reading glasses, pinched the bridge of his nose, and let out a long, heavy sigh. He looked at David, then at Jonathan. A silent, instantaneous consensus passed between the 3 men. Richard turned his attention back to me. His expression was a mixture of grim realization and profound gratitude. "We pull the term sheet on Monday," he declared. With those 7 words, the execution was finalized. In a span of less than 10 minutes, utilizing pure undisputed math, I had evaporated my twin brother's entire professional mirage. The $3 million lifeline he so desperately needed vanished into thin air. The tension in the private dining chamber dissolved, replaced by a collective sense of relief. The partners had dodged a fatal bullet, and they knew exactly who had guided them out of the line of fire. A server quietly entered the room, clearing the dinner plates and presenting the dessert menu. We spent the remainder of the evening eating vanilla bean creme brulee, the hardened caramel cracking sharply under our silver spoons. The conversation shifted seamlessly away from the fraudulent tech startup and toward much safer investments, exploring municipal bonds and upcoming commercial developments in the East Valley. When the leather-bound checkbook finally arrived, I reached for it before Richard could even raise his hand. The total came to exactly $2,000. I pulled my sleek corporate card from my wallet and handed it to the waiter. Richard attempted to protest, insisting that Vanguard should cover the expense given the invaluable intelligence I had just provided. I politely declined his offer. I wanted to pay for this meal. It was the price of admission to watch justice run its course. It was the best money I ever spent. As the evening drew to a close and we prepared to depart the quiet sanctuary of the resort, Jonathan made a casual request. He pulled out his smartphone, remarking that he wanted to document the excellent strategic dinner. He asked if we could take a quick photograph across the mahogany table to commemorate my milestone birthday and our ongoing partnership. I agreed, offering a polite professional smile for the camera lens. I watched him type out a brief caption and post the image directly to his public networking profile. It seemed like an innocent standard corporate gesture. I had no idea that this single digital photograph was about to cross the desert, bypass the velvet ropes of a Scottsdale rooftop, and detonate the remnants of Tyler's shattered reality. By 11 o'clock in the evening, my private car service was already navigating the quiet, winding roads leading away from Paradise Valley. The desert night air had finally cooled, rolling down from the surrounding mountains and brushing against the tinted windows of the sedan. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was serene. I leaned my head against the soft leather headrest, listening to the rhythmic hum of the tires gliding over the asphalt. The corporate execution was finished. The $3 million investment was officially rescinded. I had successfully protected Vanguard Investment Group from acquiring a fraudulent asset, and I had done so while enjoying a flawless culinary experience. My professional obligations were complete. My phone, resting quietly in my lap, suddenly vibrated. The screen illuminated the dark interior of the vehicle. It was another dispatch from my cousin Marcus. While I was concluding my business dinner in total seclusion, Marcus had remained stationed at the Scottsdale rooftop, observing the agonizing final act of my brother's manufactured triumph. The updates Marcus provided over the next few minutes painted a vivid, pathetic portrait of a golden child watching his kingdom crumble. According to my cousin, the lavish venue had devolved into a chaotic, drunken mess. The elegant networking event Tyler envisioned had thoroughly deteriorated. The local influencers and opportunistic attendees had consumed the majority of the open bar. They were shouting over the deafening throb of the DJ booth, spilling sticky cocktails onto the polished floorboards, and treating the exclusive space like a cheap college fraternity gathering. The aesthetic elegance was dead. The towering ice sculpture originally carved into the sleek logo of Tyler's tech startup had succumbed to the Arizona heat. It was now nothing more than a deformed, unrecognizable lump of frozen water, dripping a steady stream of moisture onto its illuminated pedestal. Tyler was stationed inside his cordoned VIP cabana, standing entirely alone. Marcus described him looking like a man who had just survived a shipwreck. The bespoke midnight blue suit was wrinkled. His silk tie hung loose around his collar, and a visible sheen of panicked sweat coated his forehead. The velvet ropes intended to keep the commoners away from his elite investors were now just a cruel barrier, trapping him inside an empty exhibit. The $800 bottles of champagne sat neglected in their silver buckets, the sparklers long extinguished, the expensive liquid growing warm and flat. He knew he had been stood up. 3 hours had passed since the scheduled arrival time. Venture capitalists do not arrive 3 hours late to a pitch. They simply do not arrive at all. In his mounting desperation, Tyler needed to figure out where the Vanguard partners went. His ego could not process the concept of being ignored. He possessed a fundamental psychological need to understand why the universe was not bending to his will. He assumed an emergency had occurred. Perhaps a sudden market crash required their immediate attention. Perhaps a family crisis had pulled them away. He needed a valid excuse to soothe the burning humiliation expanding in his chest. Tyler pulled his smartphone from his pocket. He bypassed the text message threads and ignored his unanswered voicemails. Instead, he opened a prominent professional networking application. He typed the name of the senior partner into the search bar, hoping to find a press release or an urgent corporate update explaining their absence. He navigated to Jonathan's public feed. He swiped his thumb across the glass screen, pulling the page downward to refresh the recent activity. A new post materialized at the very top of the timeline. It was an image uploaded mere minutes prior. Tyler stared at the glowing rectangle, the artificial light casting a harsh glare across his pale features. Marcus, standing just a few feet away, near the edge of the velvet rope, watched my brother freeze. The photograph displayed a quiet, soundproof dining chamber enveloped in warm, ambient lighting. It showed a circular mahogany table adorned with crystal water glasses, porcelain espresso cups, and 3 slate gray folders. Seated around that polished wood were Richard, David, and Jonathan. The 3 billionaires were leaning toward the camera, their expressions relaxed, raising glasses of Napa Valley Cabernet in a celebratory toast. Sitting directly across from them, occupying the 4th chair, was a woman dressed in a tailored charcoal sheath dress. She looked serene, commanding, and entirely at peace. Tyler stared at the face of his twin sister. His eyes darted down to read the text accompanying the image. The caption Jonathan typed was brief, professional, and devastatingly clear. Excellent strategy dinner and 30th birthday celebration with the sharpest auditor in Phoenix, Victoria Martin. Dodged a massive bullet tonight. Marcus texted me a detailed real-time account of the physical reaction that followed. He wrote that Tyler stopped breathing. The color drained from his face, leaving his skin the shade of wet ash. His shoulders dropped, and his hands began to tremble so fiercely that he nearly dropped the device onto the floorboards. In that singular, blinding moment, the disparate pieces of the evening snapped together in his brain with the force of a steel trap closing. For his entire life, Tyler had viewed me as an invisible, irrelevant entity. He categorized my career as a boring, subordinate desk job. He assumed I spent my days filing tax returns or balancing basic ledgers. He never bothered to ask for the name of my employer. He never inquired about the specific nature of my corporate audits. He treated my financial stability merely as a convenient reservoir to be drained whenever his reckless ambitions required funding. Now staring at the screen, the truth detonated inside his mind. He realized his uninvited sister was the lead external auditor evaluating his software startup. He realized the woman he deemed unworthy of a velvet rope was the exact individual holding the red pen over his company's survival. He had spent weeks fabricating user acquisition metrics and hiding severe operational debt, assuming his flashy presentation would blind the investors. He never comprehended that the investors had hired his own flesh and blood to dismantle those lies. The phrase "dodging a bullet" echoed in his mind. He knew exactly what that term meant in the venture capital sector. It meant a deal was dead. It meant the fraud had been exposed. The sheer magnitude of his miscalculation washed over him. He had begged our parents for $15,000, a sum extracted from my bank account under the guise of an emergency roof repair. He utilized my stolen capital to rent a luxury venue, purchase premium liquor, and hire security guards. He threw a monumental gala specifically designed to impress Richard, David, and Jonathan. Meanwhile, those very same investors had intentionally skipped his $15,000 party to have a quiet private dinner with his executioner. They chose my intellect over his spectacle. They toasted my birthday while leaving him to sweat under the strobe lights of a ghost town. Marcus sent one final text message before stowing his phone. He just kicked over a champagne bucket. He is sprinting toward the elevator. I read the message as my sedan turned onto my quiet residential street. I pictured the silver bucket crashing against the deck, the warm champagne pooling around the melted ice sculpture. I pictured Tyler shoving his way through the crowd of drunken influencers, his golden child illusion fractured beyond repair. He was fleeing the scene of his own financial crime, leaving behind a massive tab and an empty VIP cabana. The engine of the town car quieted as the driver pulled into my driveway. I thanked him, tipped him generously, and walked up the paved path to my front door. The desert night was silent, save for the faint chirping of crickets hidden in the landscaping. I unlocked the deadbolt, stepped inside my cool, dark house, and placed my keys on the entryway table. I knew the silence would not last. The revelation had occurred. The shock was currently morphing into raw, unbridled panic, and Tyler lacked the emotional regulation to process that panic internally. He was going to lash out. He was going to seek a target for his rage, unable to accept that he was the architect of his own demise. He would need someone to blame for the evaporation of his $3 million lifeline. I walked into my kitchen, poured a fresh glass of iced water, and placed my phone on the granite counter. I did not turn on the overhead lights. I simply stood in the shadows waiting for the inevitable storm to arrive. The digital clock on the microwave shifted forward, the green numbers glowing brightly in the dark. The countdown had begun, ticking steadily toward the moment my phone would shatter the quiet of the house. The digital clock mounted above my microwave shifted from 11:59 to midnight. At that exact second, the granite countertop began to vibrate. The low, unrelenting hum of my smartphone fractured the quiet sanctuary of my kitchen. The glowing display projected a harsh white light against the dark tile backsplash illuminating the caller identification. It was Patricia. My mother had officially launched her offensive. I did not reach for the device. I stood several feet away, leaning against the edge of the kitchen island, watching the screen illuminate, go dark, and immediately illuminate again. The persistence was staggering. She called 12 consecutive times in a span of less than 10 minutes. In the realm of interpersonal communication, dialing a number 12 times without leaving a voicemail is not an attempt to initiate a dialogue. It is a digital battering ram. It is the frantic, uncoordinated response of an individual who has lost control of the narrative and is desperately trying to force the surrounding reality back into a familiar, comfortable shape. When the calls finally ceased, a new notification chimed. This time the sender was my father. Thomas rarely communicates through text messages. He prefers the authority of a vocal command, utilizing his booming baritone to squash any lingering dissent in the household. For him to type out a message indicated a profound level of agitation. I stepped forward, picked up the phone, and read the sentence glowing on the glass. What did you do to your brother? Call us immediately. I stared at those words, analyzing the specific syntax my father chose to employ. He did not ask if I had seen Tyler. He did not ask what transpired during the Vanguard meeting. He bypassed any request for context and proceeded directly to an assumption of guilt. What did you do to your brother? In his mind, Tyler was inherently blameless, an innocent victim of unforeseen circumstances. Therefore, if Tyler was experiencing pain, someone else had to be the malicious architect of his suffering. I was the designated scapegoat, the convenient receptacle for all of their collective failures. The capitalization of the final word was his attempt to project authority through a screen demanding my instant obedience. I tapped the screen, navigating to the settings menu of the conversation thread. I pressed the mute icon. The notifications silenced. The screen faded to black. Across the Phoenix Valley, inside their modest suburban home, my parents were currently experiencing a terrifying paradigm shift. For 3 decades, they had treated me as a convenient utility. They viewed me as a doormat, a flat, resilient surface designed to absorb their missteps and keep the interior of their lives clean. They believed my sole purpose was to support the foundation of Tyler's grand theatrical existence. What they failed to realize was a fundamental truth about power dynamics. A doormat is easily stepped on, but the person who holds the deed to the property dictates who is allowed to walk through the front door. They had funded Tyler's lavish birthday party using my personal savings, operating under the assumption that my only role in life was to function as a silent, uncomplaining financial reservoir. They viewed my career simply as a mechanism to generate capital for their emergencies. They never stopped to consider the intricate nature of my profession. They never paused to comprehend that the exact analytical skills I utilized to fund their comfortable lives could easily be repurposed to dismantle their illusions. I review complex corporate ledgers for a living. I track hidden liabilities, untangle webs of deceit, and expose fraudulent actors attempting to steal millions of dollars. My parents assumed those formidable skills remained confined within the glass walls of my downtown office. They erroneously believed that biological ties rendered me blind to their specific brand of exploitation. They were currently discovering that an auditor does not switch off her objective reasoning simply because the subjects of the investigation share her last name. I turned away from the muted device and walked down the hallway toward my master bathroom. The hardwood floor felt cool beneath my bare feet. I turned the brushed nickel handle of the faucet, letting the warm water run over my hands. I dispensed a mild cleanser into my palms and washed my face. The physical act of cleansing felt deeply symbolic. I was washing away the residual tension of the evening, scrubbing off the invisible weight of their expectations. I dried my skin with a soft towel and changed into a set of loose, comfortable cotton pajamas. I did not feel the erratic, vibrating anxiety that typically accompanied family conflicts in the past. Historically, receiving a harsh reprimand from my father would send my heart racing, prompting a frantic internal monologue about how I could apologize and restore the peace. Tonight, that familiar dread was entirely absent. I returned to the dark kitchen, opened the stainless steel refrigerator, and retrieved a chilled bottle of sparkling water. I poured the clear liquid into a tall glass. The carbonation popped and fizzed, a crisp, sharp sound echoing in the profound silence of my home. I took a long sip, savoring the cool sensation. I was entirely at peace. Society often dictates an unspoken rule regarding familial loyalty. The cultural expectation suggests that we must protect our relatives from harm, even when they are the architects of their own destruction. It is a toxic philosophy that enables perpetual dysfunction. I rejected that premise entirely. Standing in my kitchen, tracing the condensation on the outside of my glass, I reviewed the events of the evening with crystal clarity. I did not ruin Tyler's life. I did not write the bloated, non-functional code for his software platform. I did not purchase fake automated bots to artificially inflate his user metrics. I did not sign a predatory lease for a luxury loft he could not afford, nor did I squander operational capital on designer suits and premium liquor. Tyler engineered his own precarious house of cards. He built a structure entirely devoid of a solid foundation. My only action was removing the artificial safety net. I simply provided a group of intelligent investors with the raw, undisputed facts. I presented a slate gray folder containing nothing but verified numbers. If the truth possessed the power to destroy his company, then his company deserved to be destroyed. Truth is an absolute defense. It requires no embellishment, no raised voices, and no emotional manipulation. It stands on its own, a rigid, undeniable fortress against those who attempt to bend reality to their will. Tyler tried to pitch a fantasy, and I introduced a dose of reality. The resulting collision was spectacular, but I was not the villain of the narrative. I was merely the catalyst for an inevitable reckoning. I finished my sparkling water, placed the empty glass in the sink, and walked toward my bedroom. The parents were temporarily silenced, their frantic attempts to reach me neutralized by a simple software setting. However, the primary antagonist of this narrative was still unaccounted for. Tyler had fled the Scottsdale rooftop in a state of blind panic. He was currently navigating the desolate desert highways in his leased sports car, his ego shattered, his $3 million lifeline evaporated. He was a desperate man, stripped of his protective armor, and desperate men are fundamentally unpredictable. The clock on my nightstand glowed in the dark, the green digits silently counting upward. The night was far from over. The storm had broken over the city, and the final, unavoidable confrontation was speeding directly toward my locked front door. The hours between midnight and 3 in the morning possess a distinct hollow quality. The relentless ambient noise of the Phoenix metropolitan area strips away, leaving only the barest acoustic realities. I rested on top of my bed covers in the dark, watching the ceiling fan blades slice through the shadows cast by the street lamp outside. Sleep remained a biological impossibility. The adrenaline from the Paradise Valley dinner had metabolized into a cold, sustained vigilance. I was tracing the psychological distance my twin brother had to travel from the apex of his Scottsdale rooftop party to the inevitable nadir of his breaking point. I visualized his descent with the clinical detachment of a forensic observer. He likely spent the first hour trapped in deep denial, pacing the empty VIP cabana, fabricating wild excuses for the Vanguard defection. The second hour would have been consumed by logistical nightmares, dealing with irate event managers, demanding final credit card authorizations for the melted ice sculptures and the depleted liquor inventory. By the third hour, the synthetic courage provided by the alcohol would evaporate, leaving behind the stark, terrifying architecture of his ruin. The $3 million lifeline was gone. The investors had publicly aligned themselves with the sister he treated like a peasant. He was cornered, humiliated, and stripped of his manufactured identity. At exactly 3:14 in the morning, the device resting on my nightstand came to life. The vibration hummed against the wood, a relentless mechanical pulse fracturing the quiet room. The screen flared, casting a pale rectangular glow across the painted drywall. The caller identification displayed the single name I had been anticipating: Tyler. I did not rush to answer. I let the device ring 3 times, intentionally establishing the cadence of the interaction. I controlled the pace. On the 4th ring, I swiped the green icon and lifted the speaker to my ear. I did not offer a greeting. I did not say a word. A frantic intake of breath rushed through the receiver. He skipped any formal introduction and launched a barrage of guttural, unhinged screams. "You ruined me!" The words tore from his throat, raw and saturated with panic. "You cost me $3 million. You stole my investors." His voice cracked, echoing off hard concrete surfaces. I could hear the distant hollow roar of a freeway overpass in the background, indicating he was standing in an empty parking garage, isolated and feral. He sounded like a trapped animal lashing out at the steel bars of a cage he had built himself. He hurled insults, blending childhood grievances with corporate terminology he barely comprehended. He accused me of harboring a lifelong jealousy regarding his ambition. He claimed I conspired with Richard and David to orchestrate a personal vendetta to destroy his software empire. I remained motionless on the mattress. I did not interrupt his tirade. I applied the exact same interrogation techniques I utilize when a hostile chief executive attempts to justify missing assets during a tense boardroom deposition. You let the subject exhaust their oxygen. You allow them to empty their arsenal of excuses until nothing remains but the raw, unadulterated terror hiding underneath the bluster. His outburst lasted for nearly 3 minutes. Eventually, his lungs failed to sustain the volume. His shouts devolved into ragged, heavy panting. The silence stretched across the cellular connection, dense and heavy with expectation. He was waiting for my defense. He expected the typical Victoria, the subservient twin who would scramble to explain herself, apologize for causing him distress, and offer a path toward reconciliation. He was waiting for the doormat to absorb the mud. I shifted my weight on the pillows, taking a slow, measured breath. When I finally spoke, my tone was icy level and stripped of any familial warmth. "I did not steal your investors, Tyler," I stated, articulating each syllable with surgical precision. "I audited your fraud." A sharp gasp transmitted through the speaker, followed by dead air. The word fraud carries a specific, terrifying legal weight in the business sector. It pierced the remnants of his ego. It was not an emotional insult. It was a criminal classification. I did not allow him the opportunity to recover his footing. I pressed the advantage, pivoting directly to the secondary betrayal. "And before you attempt to lecture me regarding loyalty, let us discuss the financing of your little networking event." I continued, my voice dropping to a dangerous, steady whisper. "Mom and Dad paid for your rooftop cabana, utilizing the $15,000 they begged from me yesterday. They fabricated a story about an emergency roof repair to extract my savings." I heard him swallow hard, a wet, nervous sound echoing in the empty garage. He tried to stammer a denial, a weak protest, claiming ignorance, but I cut him off smoothly. "I paid for the extravagant birthday party you specifically barred me from attending." I stated the facts, landing like hammer blows. "I funded the stage. You provided the clown. Consider the lost vanguard funding your required entry fee." I pulled the phone away from my ear. I did not wait for his rebuttal. I did not care if he intended to apologize, argue, or weep. I pressed the red icon, severing the connection. The call terminated with a soft, definitive click. While the screen remained illuminated, I navigated to his contact profile. I tapped the option to block the caller. I performed the identical action for Patricia and Thomas. A digital iron curtain fell across my personal network. The access they had exploited for 30 years was permanently revoked. I placed the phone back onto the nightstand. The glow faded, plunging the bedroom back into deep, restful darkness. I leaned back against the pillows. The quiet that descended upon my house was profound. It was not the heavy, oppressive silence of unresolved conflict. It was the pristine, beautiful tranquility of a settled ledger. The debt was acknowledged, the deception was exposed, and the liability was excised from my balance sheet. The sound of that silence was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. I closed my eyes and drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep. However, emotional closure does not recover stolen capital. When I woke up on Sunday morning, the psychological victory felt satisfying, but the financial discrepancy remained unresolved. My parents had executed a wire fraud scheme under false pretenses. They possessed $15,000 of my money, and they erroneously believed the blocked phone numbers meant I was simply walking away from the theft. As the desert sun began to bleach the eastern horizon, I turned my attention away from the emotional fallout and toward the formal legal reckoning. The family drama was concluded. The corporate litigation was about to commence, and I needed to draft a document that would strip away the final layer of their comfortable delusion. I woke up on Sunday morning bathed in the crisp, golden sunlight unique to the Sonoran Desert. For the first time in 3 decades, my chest felt hollow in the best possible way. The chronic tight knot of familial obligation had unraveled while I slept. I brewed a pot of dark roast coffee, poured a cup, and carried it into my home office. The house was pristine quiet and securely locked against the chaos I had left burning across the city. Emotional closure is a beautiful, necessary milestone. Establishing psychological boundaries provides immense relief. However, abstract healing does not replenish a depleted savings account. My parents orchestrated a calculated scheme to extract capital under false pretenses. They committed textbook wire fraud to finance a social event. In the corporate sector, you do not simply block a thief on your cellular device and walk away empty-handed. You initiate asset recovery. You utilize the justice system to balance the ledger. To understand why my next move was so devastating, you must understand how Thomas and Patricia operated their entire adult lives. They despised paper trails. They navigated the world relying exclusively on spoken guilt trips, implied promises, and emotional coercion. If they needed cash, they deployed tears. If they failed to repay a debt to a relative or a friend, they used their status as respectable, struggling parents to silence the lender. They never signed promissory notes. They never documented their obligations. They operated under the arrogant assumption that biology granted them perpetual immunity from the Arizona Civil Code. They believed family members could not sue one another without enduring social ruin. I set my ceramic mug on the desk, woke my dual monitors, and opened a blank word processing document. I did not draft an angry email. I composed a formal, legally binding demand letter. The tone I adopted was identical to the detached clinical voice I employ when issuing a final notice to a non-compliant holding company. I began by establishing a strict chronological timeline of events. I detailed the exact date and time of Patricia dialing my number. I transcribed the specific lies she told regarding compromised roof tiles, impending water damage, and a fictitious contractor requiring an urgent deposit. Beneath that narrative, I inserted the undeniable proof. I embedded the high-resolution screenshot of the text message where she explicitly requested $15,000 for the emergency structural repair. Below that image, I pasted the bank wire transfer receipt. The routing numbers matched the date aligned perfectly, and the memo line validating the transaction intended purpose stared back in stark black and white. Then I articulated the legal pivot. I wrote that because the funds were obtained through intentional misrepresentation, specifically to finance a luxury birthday gala for Tyler Martin, the transfer no longer qualified as a familial gift. I classified the transaction as a misallocated loan resulting from fraudulent inducement. I informed them that their actions met the statutory definition of conversion of property under state law. I moved to the ultimatum. I outlined the non-negotiable terms of recovery. I granted them exactly 30 days from the date of receipt to return the $15,000 in full. I specified that a certified cashier's check or a direct wire transfer to my primary account were the only acceptable methods of repayment. I offered no payment plans, I offered no room for negotiation. If the deadline expired without full restitution, I stated my immediate intent to file a civil suit in Maricopa County Superior Court. I added a crucial, terrifying detail. I reminded them that civil dockets are a matter of public record. If I filed the lawsuit, their neighbors, their friends on the charity committees, and the local news outlets would have unrestricted access to the court filings detailing how they defrauded their own daughter to buy champagne for their son. I noted that I would also seek maximum compensation for all associated legal fees, court costs, and accrued interest. I printed the document on heavy premium stock paper, the printer whirred, sliding the crisp sheets onto the output tray. I arranged the pages, stapled the corner, and signed my full name at the bottom using a blue ink pen signifying an original wet signature. I folded the document precisely and sealed it inside a sturdy white envelope. On Monday morning, before driving to my downtown corporate office, I stopped at the local postal branch. I did not utilize standard postage. A standard stamp allows the recipient to claim the parcel was lost in transit. I approached the counter and requested certified delivery with a mandatory signature and a return receipt. The postal clerk processed the transaction and handed me the distinct green tracking slip. Holding that small piece of cardboard felt like holding the deed to my own emancipation. I watched the clerk drop the sealed envelope into the outgoing bin. The gears of consequence were officially in motion. The Postal Service executed the delivery on Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting at my desk reviewing an unrelated merger acquisition when my tracking application sent a notification to my screen. The status flashed a bright green indicator. The digital signature log confirmed that Thomas received and signed for the parcel at 1:14 in the afternoon. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and visualized the scene unfolding in their suburban kitchen. I pictured my father tearing open the envelope. He likely expected a handwritten apology, a desperate plea for reconciliation, or a tearful letter explaining my actions from the weekend. Instead, his eyes scanned the stark, unforgiving legal terminology. I imagined Patricia reading over his shoulder, the color draining from her cheeks as she stared at the printed screenshot of her own deceptive text message. They could not gaslight a printed bank record. They could not manipulate a certified demand letter. The document stripped away every single emotional defense mechanism they had honed over 30 years. If they attempted to call my office, my receptionist was already instructed to redirect their inquiries to a local civil attorney I kept on retainer. If they tried to show up at my property, my newly installed exterior security system would record their trespassing, providing further evidence for a potential restraining order. The most profound indicator of my success was the reaction that followed the delivery. There was none. I checked my blocked messages folder later that evening. During the weekend, that hidden directory was overflowing with frantic attempts to breach my boundaries. Tyler had left several unhinged voicemails before giving up. My parents had sent dozens of demanding texts. By Tuesday night, following the receipt of the certified mail, the folder was entirely barren. The silence radiating from their household was not born of stubborn pride or lingering anger. It was the sound of a terrifying realization settling over their reality. Thomas and Patricia finally understood the gravity of their miscalculation. They had pushed their golden goose directly into the jaws of a wolf. They stripped away the obedient, compliant daughter and uncovered a relentless, calculating creditor. There were no more voicemails calling me dramatic. There were no more text messages demanding blind loyalty to my brother. They were trapped in a mathematical, legal reality they could neither cry nor yell their way out of. The clock was officially ticking down from 30 days, and the looming threat of public litigation hovered over their heads like a drawn blade. The financial trap was securely closed. The family dynamic was permanently shattered, replaced by a rigid legal boundary. Yet the story required one final sequence of events to reach its true conclusion. While my parents scrambled to figure out how to avoid a public courtroom battle, the broader ramifications of the Vanguard defection were beginning to ripple through Tyler Holotech empire. The stage was set for the ultimate payoff, revealing what happens when an illusion finally collides with the unyielding pavement of the real world. 2 weeks drifted past the delivery of my certified demand letter. The relentless Arizona summer gradually surrendered to an unusually scorching autumn. Inside the corporate ecosystem of downtown Phoenix, the gears of consequence ground forward with merciless efficiency. Vanguard Investment Group did not merely pass on funding my brother. Richard directed his legal department to formally retract the preliminary term sheet. The official withdrawal notice was delivered to Tyler via a sterile, unbranded courier envelope on a Tuesday morning. The rejection was clinical, final, and devoid of any comforting platitudes. A software enterprise operating on vapor cannot survive when its primary oxygen supply is abruptly severed. Without the $3 million capital injection, the financial rot consuming my twin brother's company accelerated at a staggering pace. By the final Friday of that same month, the carefully constructed facade collapsed entirely. His core team of developers walked out the moment their direct deposit payroll failed to clear the banking system. The property management firm overseeing his premium co-working space locked the glass doors, pasting a glaring eviction notice directly over the custom-frosted corporate logo. Marcus, my ever-observant cousin, provided the closing chapter, detailing the golden child's inevitable downfall. Tyler was forced to break the lease on his panoramic downtown loft, incurring ruinous termination penalties. The sleek European sports car vanished from his designated parking spot, repossessed under the cover of darkness, because his monthly installments were 90 days delinquent. He packed his remaining designer suits into cheap cardboard boxes and moved back into his childhood bedroom. The visionary tech founder was reduced to a 30-year-old dependent sleeping under the identical roof as the individuals who enabled his grand delusion. While my brother confronted his sudden descent into obscurity, my parents faced their own looming deadline. The 30-day window stipulated in my legal correspondence was rapidly closing. Thomas and Patricia possessed a fixed retirement income, a budget heavily reliant on the monthly stipends I had permanently terminated. They did not have $15,000 of liquid assets sitting idle in a checking account. They could no longer solicit loans from sympathetic relatives because my email containing the fraudulent bank receipt had effectively torched their credibility across our entire extended family tree. Aunt Linda and Uncle Robert refused to answer their phone calls. The safety net was gone. Faced with the imminent threat of a public civil lawsuit, they surrendered to the only viable option remaining. They marched into their local credit union and applied for a second mortgage on their suburban property. I can picture the scene vividly. My father, a man who built his entire identity on projecting fierce independence and unyielding authority, sitting across from a junior loan officer. He had to hand over decades of hard-earned home equity borrowing against the very walls that sheltered him just to repay the daughter he thought he could exploit without consequence. The paperwork must have felt heavy. The humiliation of that transaction must have tasted like ash in his mouth. On the 28th day of the ultimatum, a pristine white envelope arrived in my corporate mailbox. I sliced it open with a metal letter opener. Inside rested a certified cashier's check issued by a regional bank made out to Victoria Martin for the exact sum of $15,000. There was no accompanying note tucked inside the fold. There was no written apology outlining their regrets. There was only the tangible, undeniable surrender of two people who finally realized they were hopelessly outmatched. I did not cash the check to purchase a luxury vehicle, a designer wardrobe, or a lavish vacation. I endorsed the back of the paper with my signature, opened my primary brokerage application, and deposited the entire amount into a high-yield index fund. I took the capital they stole to manufacture a fleeting illusion and transformed it into a vehicle for genuine compounding wealth. That money will grow silently in the background, generating dividends as a permanent monument to my emancipation. Naturally, the social fallout rippled through their suburban circles. Patricia could not accept defeat gracefully. She embarked on a desperate public relations tour, attending her charity luncheons, neighborhood book clubs, and weekend farmers markets, armed with a fabricated narrative. She told anyone willing to listen that I was a cold, calculating opportunist. She painted a vivid picture of a heartless daughter who kicked her family while they were experiencing profound financial hardship. She conveniently omitted the part where she lied about a collapsing roof to fund a champagne pyramid. She expected those rumors to drift back to me. She wanted me to feel the sting of social ostracization. She wanted to provoke a defense, hoping I would engage in a public shouting match to clear my name. I felt nothing. The opinions of individuals who spend their afternoons drinking cheap wine and exchanging neighborhood gossip hold zero currency in my world. My reality was expanding far beyond the narrow, suffocating boundaries of the Martin household. My career trajectory shifted dramatically following the Vanguard intervention. Richard David and Jonathan did not forget the auditor who guided them away from a disastrous corporate acquisition. They transferred their entire portfolio of due diligence contracts to my specific agency, explicitly requesting that I lead every single future investigation. The sudden influx of high-tier billing hours resulted in an unprecedented year-end bonus. The executive board recognized the value I brought to the firm and promoted me to junior partner just before the winter holidays. I was granted my own corner office complete with panoramic views of the very desert skyline my brother had vainly attempted to conquer. I took that substantial bonus, combined it with my meticulously managed savings, and purchased a house. The property sits in a quiet, elevated neighborhood near the foothills of the Camelback Mountains. It features vaulted ceilings, rich hardwood floors, and a sprawling culinary kitchen bathed in natural light. The most important feature of the home, however, is not the modern architecture or the lush desert landscaping. The most critical detail is the name printed on the county property deed. It belongs solely to me. There are no CO signers. There are no invisible strings attached to the foundation. I do not owe anyone a spare key. I stood on my back patio on the evening of the closing, holding a crystal glass of iced water, watching the city stretch out below. The air was crisp, fragrant with blooming sage and cooling asphalt. I traced the perimeter of my enclosed backyard, feeling a profound, unshakable sense of ownership. For 3 decades, I believed that enduring toxic behavior was the mandatory rent required to occupy a space within my biological family. I thought being the dependable, quiet sister would eventually earn me a permanent seat at their table. I learned the hard way that enablers do not reward loyalty. They only extract resources until the well runs completely dry, and then they discard the empty vessel. Setting boundaries with destructive relatives is frequently misunderstood by broader society. People label it as a cruel abandonment. They call it a betrayal of shared blood. It is neither of those things. It is pure, unfiltered self-preservation. It is the conscious decision to stop offering your own limbs, to feed a fire that is meant to keep someone else warm. My parents raised my twin brother to believe success was an aesthetic to be purchased rather than a foundation to be built through actual labor. They financed a precarious house of cards, and they demanded that I serve as the structural support, keeping the entire thing upright. When I finally identified the manipulation and stepped out of the way, gravity simply took over. I did not cause the collapse. I merely allowed the natural laws of physics to function without my ongoing interference. The best revenge you can inflict upon people who actively try to diminish your light is not engaging in bitter screaming matches. It is not sending angry text messages or attempting to publicly shame them on the internet. True retribution is entirely silent. It is the steady act of building a life so prosperous, so rich in genuine fulfillment, that their toxic opinions cannot find a single crack to slip through. It is letting them wallow in the wreckage of their own poor choices, while you sit comfortably in the sanctuary you constructed with your own 2 hands. My brother chose a $15,000 party filled with opportunistic strangers. Today he possesses his empty memories, his ruined credit score, and his childhood bedroom. I chose the unvarnished truth. Today, I possess my thriving career, my beautiful home, and an impenetrable peace of mind. So if you are sitting somewhere right now, listening to this story while nursing the fresh wound of familial rejection, I want you to internalize this lesson. If the people who are supposed to champion your existence decide to leave you off the guest list, do not beg for an invitation. Do not stand outside their venue hoping they will eventually recognize your worth and open the door. Turn around, walk away, and build your own table. Growing up in the sprawling suburbs of America, we are sold a very specific, deeply ingrained version of loyalty. It is the idealized Thanksgiving dinner table, the matching holiday photographs, the unspoken cultural rule that family is family, no matter the toll it takes on your spirit. But what happens when that cost is your own future? Victoria's story is not merely about a stolen $15,000 or a canceled venture capital term sheet. It is a brilliant, unforgiving mirror held up to a quiet, devastating reality that so many of us face, the realization that to the people who were supposed to love you most, you were never a person. You were simply a resource. We are conditioned to be the reliable ones, the designated safety nets in a society that prides itself on individualism, yet routinely exploits the dutiful child. We pay the emergency bills, we swallow the casual insults, and we watch from the shadows while the golden child is handed the keys to the kingdom. In Victoria's case, her sacrifice bought a neon sign and a melting ice sculpture on a Scottsdale rooftop. But the true tragedy was not her exclusion from an extravagant VIP list. The tragedy was the decades she spent believing that if she just gave enough of herself, if she was just quiet and accommodating enough, her family would eventually recognize her worth. Here is the hardest, most vital lesson to learn in a culture that romanticizes unconditional, blood-bound loyalty. Sometimes the most empowering thing you can do is permanently close the ledger. When Victoria sat in that soundproof mahogany dining room in Paradise Valley, she was not just auditing a fraudulent tech startup. She was auditing her entire bloodline. She stopped accepting the toxic lie that setting a boundary is an act of betrayal. By removing herself as the structural support for her brother's delusions, she did not actively destroy him. She simply let gravity do its inevitable natural work, and in doing so, she bought her own freedom. There is a profound, terrifying peace that arrives when you finally stop trying to buy a seat at a table that was explicitly designed to keep you out. If Victoria's journey resonated with the quiet, exhausting battles you fight behind closed doors, and if you have ever had to become your own fierce advocate when the people who raised you let you down, please take a moment to subscribe and follow Eldenly Stories. We share these narratives because you are never alone in the dark. Look around your own life right now. Think about the time, the capital, and the emotional energy you pour into the relationships that only ever ask you for more. Are you the architect of your own sanctuary? Or are you just financing someone else's illusion? Tomorrow morning, the sun will rise, casting light on the boundaries you have bravely drawn and the ones you have not yet found the courage to build. The deadbolt on your front door is heavy, and the silence in your home can either be a prison or a paradise. The lingering question is this: who are you still keeping a spare key for, and what will it ultimately cost you when they finally decide to turn the lock?